afternoon. It's really great to be here. I've been really looking forward to coming. I'm quite new to the research academic world as such. My PhD started off as just kind of like a little area of interest that has exploded. So I'm really, really excited to kind of come and talk about it today and to really hear about other people's work and get other people's input, because like I said, this is all very new to me. So my background is I'm a mental health nurse. I have worked in high secure women's services in Rampton, and then after that I've worked in Sheffield Health and Social Care, which is where I work full time now. I've worked as a nurse in liaison psychiatry for about 4 years, and then I've been on a secondment the last year. So I'm currently on a secondment as a peer support work lead. So that is a new role within the organisation. I also have my own lived experience in mental illness, so that is developing the peer support worker roles within the trust, supporting the current workforce, and kind of looking for opportunities to really develop that within our organisation. So that's what I do as my day job. And then I'm also studying part-time at the University of Hull, where I'm doing my study on the newly registered mental health nurses' values throughout transition. So I'm really hoping to get a bit of a catchier title by the time I finish, because it's quite a mouthful, but this is where I'm at the minute. It is in the process, so I'm at the very beginning of a year-long study, which I want to talk to you about today. I'm really fortunate, so my PhD supervisor is Jane Ray, so she is overseeing the national preceptorship framework, so it's really, really amazing to have her as my supervisor, because she's had a really great input throughout this and has been really supportive. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about kind of how I've got to where I'm at my study, and kind of what is starting to be generated from talking to students who are about to qualify as newly registered mental health nurses. So the background to this for me, I've always been really interested in that preceptorship period. So, I mean, I've only been qualified 5 years now myself, so it's something that's still quite close. And when I first started looking at this, I just think it's a really important kind of time for people. And, you know, in the backdrop of the national context of the nursing vacancies, I wanted to understand more what was happening just for mental health nurses. So what's been really helpful is the 2022 report by Health Education England, the Commitment and Growth Advancing Mental Health Nursing. So that had some really interesting information in that in December 2021, mental health nurse trusts had over 11,000 vacancies, which that accounted for 28% of our nursing vacancies in the UK, which when you look at that proportionately is quite disproportionate. It's a huge kind of vacancy rate, and above all, it's got mental health nursing has the highest kind of leaver rate that since 2017. So it seemed really important to kind of understand this. And what was documented in this article was around the real importance of nurturing our newly registered nurses and supporting them during that transition period. And looking at that at a broader sense, it's been a really key part of our NHS nursing plan as well, is how we support newly registered nurses. So this has always been kind of an interest, and this then started to be supported by evidence. So I was really clear that I wanted to explore this area for mental health nurses, but wasn't really sure how. So then I started to look at another area of interest that has always been, again, this is something I think we talk about a lot, is values. So when I was a student, and I know as a module I teach on sometimes now, and there's a huge component where we talk about nursing values, and then every organisation we work in talks about trust values, and then we have obviously wider NHS values, and we have values-based recruitment. So we talk about it a lot, and it seems really important, but I wanted to really explore that a bit more as well. Because obviously we have our NHS values, but again I wanted to look at that at a more personal level to mental health nursing, and kind of myself understand the background to that as well. So the mental health competency framework that came out in 2020 looked at values a lot, and it had values as like a really integral part for every kind of level of mental health nursing as you progress career. So again, it was highlighted as being really important to mental health nurses, and also for us to understand the values of the service users. So to be looking at someone's values, we really need to understand what that means, and newly registered nurses entering the profession needs to understand kind of what that really means. So then again, I went a bit further back to think about the beginning and origins of these values. So I came across the 10 essential shared capabilities, which I know we've probably all heard a lot about, which was published in 2004. And from that point, it spoke a lot about values, and values within mental health nursing specifically, and how it's important for the mental health nurse to emphasise values in practice, particularly when working with people with mental illness. So that made me think about, again, this in the context, values in the context of newly registered mental health nurses. So our newly registered mental health nurses obviously have the wider professional values and then mental health nursing values. So obviously we have our wider healthcare profession values, and we work within those national frameworks. So to be able to work within our national frameworks, it's really important that people entering the profession understand those professional values and are able to keep them in practice. And also, I started to think about our personal values as well. And I think in mental health nursing, and what I found from speaking to people is there's something really, really important about our personal values, and sometimes the conflict that some of our practice has historically brought. And we talk a lot, don't we, about the therapeutic use of self. And again, if we're truly doing that, we need as mental health nurses to be supported to work towards our values. And also when building our relationship with service users as well. So I kind of knew that values was in there as well somewhere for me, within this piece of research. So then I kind of parked that for a minute and went back to the newly registered nurses, because I really wanted to understand that process, because we know it's a process, we've seen it, we've been through it, but I wanted to kind of again get that background to that process. So obviously we have the preceptorship period, but that is part of a transitional period, and I wanted to kind of really understand the meaning of the transitional period in itself. So Duksha, I've put the references at the end, did a lot of work around the transformation process for newly registered nurses and the transitional period. And what he said was that obviously nurses go through that process of doing, being and knowing, which is really key, and it's kind of in a cycle, so it just goes round and round. And kind of that for newly registered nurses translates to from when the newly registered nurse completes education to when they become a fully competent, accountable practitioner. So Duksha and Benner created these transitional theories of nursing based on an original work in 1974 by an American person called Kramer, who looked at why nurses leave nursing. And what this study found was that nurses really struggled when student nurses went into practice. They really felt that they were unprepared for some of the things that they face, and there was a huge kind of conflict between what happens in the training, in their education, and what happened in clinical practice. So these are what kind of the transitional models and theories for nursing were developed from this information. And Benner and Duksha looked at kind of theories of skill acquisition, which were really, really interesting. And it looked at kind of roles and responsibilities for people when they first qualify, and knowledge and expectations of student nurses. And what this research found was that it was a huge shock for newly registered nurses, and they had this still what they referred to as the transition shock. And it was not just like it was a very emotive process for nurses, and it was a huge kind of moment in their life. So it felt again that it just again highlighted this is a really important process, and it's really pivotal for us to understand how we support our newly registered mental health nurses to be able to kind of flourish in that environment and what might impact that. So this kind of set me off on my literature review, because I really wanted to understand what was out there for newly registered mental health nurses specifically. So I started my literature review, And I was quite surprised by this process, to be honest, because I was hoping that there would be more than I found. So I tried to obviously look for newly registered mental health nurses solely. So initially when I searched that, there did come up over 300 results. There was a lot of duplicated articles across databases, which got me down to 172 articles, then to 144, and then down to 35. So I excluded, all the articles I excluded were ones which you couldn't apply to mental health nurse settings. So that would be if it applied solely to child branch or adult branch, but had some mental health element to it, but wasn't applicable to mental health nurses or that environment. And also I needed to find studies that did include within the first 24 months of qualifying, and not just a student nurse process, the whole process. So that actually took me down to 13 papers that I found. So because a lot of the articles kind of included things that wouldn't be helpful. So it was looking at general wards, or it was looking at NHS really specific organisational interventions, which wouldn't be applicable to the wider setting or to newly registered mental health nurses. There was quite a lot of research actually on pre-registration programmes, and there was some research on values in pre-registration programmes, but there was nothing kind of looking at that transitional period. And a lot of the papers that I found were looking at specific mental health conditions rather than this experience. So after all that, I was left with 13 papers that I could use for my literature review. But what I did find was there's a lot of research and there's so much evidence on the transitional period for newly registered nurses, but the majority was based on adult branches of nursing. There was some which included mental health nurses, but a lot of it was around their perspective alongside other perspectives. And I think there's something really unique about the experience of mental health nurses that I wanted to understand. And also obviously keeping that kind of interest in values. When I looked at that there's not really very much at all on the values of mental health nurses during the transition period. So I really wanted to understand that. There was a really fantastic study, actually a longitudinal study, looking at student mental health nurses' values, but then it just kind of stopped at the end of that journey. So I was really intrigued kind of to know a little bit more around what happens after that as well. So all this brought me to my aim of my research. So I really want to answer these following questions. So what are the experiences of newly registered mental health nurses during transition, and how does this transition impact newly registered mental health nurses' values? So I kind of needed to think about how I wanted to do this, and how I was going to collect the data. And straight away it was really clear to me that I needed to take a longitudinal approach, because I'm trying to understand that experience, and I couldn't understand that experience if I was just doing it at one point in time. I really wanted to capture various parts of the participants' journeys, and I really wanted to kind of understand what was going on. And to meet my study aim, I did really need to do a longitudinal study. So then I really thought about how I wanted to do it. And initially I was absolutely 100% sure I was going to obviously do a qualitative research study, because I really wanted to understand that experience. And I think the only way we can understand that experience is really having those meaningful conversations with people, especially if you're doing it over a period. I think it's a real privilege to kind of follow somebody over that year. So absolutely I was really focused on initially doing a qualitative study. So this has now changed slightly, and I'll talk to you kind of around the process and why I've done that in a minute. But I'm now doing a longitudinal mixed methods approach. It's very much qualitative driven, but there is a quantitative element to it, which I'll talk about in the next slide. But keeping to the qualitative part of it, I really wanted to, like I say, understand those lived experiences. And I really thought that once I looked at all the different approaches, an IPA approach was something that I really wanted to do. So the reason why I picked IPA was that I really wanted to understand the experience of that person, and it really is, because we talk about, you know, when I was reading about this, it talked about a moment of significance or an experience of significance for people to reflect on. And I really think that this period for all of us when we qualified and all of us going for that journey was a real moment of significance, and I think in people's lives, and I think it is, you know, you couldn't class it as anything else. And using this approach as kind of allowed me to really start to like kind of share, people are sharing as they're making sense of that experience and what it means to them, and like I'm hearing their accounts and stories of what they're going through at the moment. So that's the approach I picked for the qualitative element. It really seemed to fit with those kind of experiences that newly registered nurses go through. And it was a time through it's been an absolute privilege already to speak to people as they're finishing their studies, and you really are kind of hearing what they're really reflecting on it and thinking about what that means to them and how that feels for them. And it's a key part of, that's kind of a real key part of the process. So that is the key element and key approach I've taken. The quantitative element, you can't see that. I'm really sorry, it was really hard to find an image of this scale, but I have put it in the reference, so there's a much clearer kind of focus on it. So the quantitative element, so the reason I picked to add this to it was because I found this nursing professional value scale, and I wanted it to kind of bring a bit of value to the qualitative element of my research. So this is a scale that was developed in America by Weisenshank, and it is a nursing professional value scale. It's a 28-point scale that looks at 28 different values. It's a Likert scale, and people kind of measure where they're at on that at a given time. So this scale, I obviously needed to think about, would it be applicable to the UK, and would it be applicable to mental health nurses? And there is actually already quite a lot of well, not a lot at all, but a few papers out there about how it's been transferred to various places. So it has been transferred to UK values before, and it has been transferred to various values in other parts of the world for nursing studies before. So I did align it, and then I broke it all down to the American nursing values and the UK nursing values, and kind of transfer it across, and the majority of it did transfer directly. So it was something that was felt, you know, it was valid to use for this study, and obviously for mental health nurses as well. So I wanted to bring these two things together. So I'm going to come to shortly about how I've brought them together, because I'm using them concurrently, and I'm not bringing them together until the end of the study. So I've started recruitment now, and I'm in the process of recruiting. So I've done about 9 interviews so far. So each of the participants that I'm speaking to are asked to, which is a big ask, to participate in 4 IPA interviews at 4 separate points. So they have been asked to take part at the point of the final year. So when they're in their final year of their mental health nursing training, at point of qualification, and then at 3 and 6 months after that. So I'm kind of following them through that journey. And at the same time, they're also given the nursing professional value scale to complete, which, like I say, is quite a simple scale. And then I'm going to align them together and see kind of if there's any commonalities between them. So far, that's kind of how I'm recruiting, and there's 2 overarching themes. So when I'm talking to people, the element of my study that's looking at what kind of the journey is for mental health nurses is being a mental health nurse and influential factors during the transitional period, and actually having these really open conversations. A lot of things have come organically, particularly around values. Obviously we have steered towards that if needed, but I say it's been a semi-structured, but I'd say less than semi-structured interviews. They've just been really relaxed, really conversations that have been slightly guided. So that's kind of the approach I've taken. So just touching on how I've recruited. So I've had a big learning from this process. I was probably a bit naive going into this recruitment process. So I was recruiting final year mental health nursing students at the point of when they're finishing their studies. So when I started to do it, I wanted to catch people like in their last month of their nursing training. This, in hindsight, wasn't very successful because people are at the point of starting their new job, completing extra hours, submitting all their final work, getting their pins, starting their new job. So it was really, really difficult. I really struggled with recruitment. I got like 2 participants, so I needed to kind of revisit that and amend my ethics approval. And what I then decided to do was look at what is happening for students during the year and when would be the best time to recruit. So I then started to recruit students at the point of when they're going on their final placement or just before they're going on their final placement, and it has fortunately few started to have a lot more success. And actually what it's brought out is a whole world of other discussion and of information, which I don't quite know how I'm going to bring that in yet, but it's brought a lot of really rich data as well from this kind of period and anxieties and concerns that people have, which I'll come to in a minute. A bit of a summary of what's happened so far. So I'm recruiting from a number of HEIs. So Hull, obviously that's where I am and that's what I teach. Sheffield, Hallam, thanks Jim, Manchester Met, and a few other. Lincoln and York are all places so far where I've started to get participants from, which again has been really great, because initially I was just focusing on one HEI, and there's such a difference in kind of what's coming out of different places. So just touching on the generated themes so far. So I'm using NVivo and manual thematic analysis now. I'm still learning, so I need to revisit this a lot. So this is something that I'm still working on as well, this analysis so far. And also after each interview, I'm taking some notes on non-verbal aspects of that. And sometimes that's been difficult because some of the interviews have been over Teams, but when they haven't, it's actually been really helpful as well. So there's 3 themes that have started to kind of come out of the work so far that I've been able to identify. And it's been really interesting. It's been really emotive for people talking about this, and it's been a real privilege to listen to it. So people are talking about their journey from when they've so at the point most of my participants at now, they're going on their final placement or started their final placement. So the first thing that's come out is team culture and attitude. So these are quotes that people have said, participants have said, and what the first person, it was a really kind of fascinating experience. They've got a real passion for working in older adults, and they spoke all the way through about this passion of working with older adults. And then they said, oh, but my job's in home treatment adult team. And it was purely based, it's an area this participant did not want to work in, had no interest particularly, but had picked it because of the team and because they felt supported. And then the other thing was there was so much around kind of people observing arguments, disputes, and how we're talking to each other as practitioners and how we speak to each other, and people are picking their careers based on that, which is, it's quite difficult to hear, and I think we've got a lot to think about with that. The second thing that's come up a lot is learning needs, and I wonder if this correlates with the pandemic. A lot of students are saying that they did the simulated placements, so they kind of feel like they've missed a lot of clinical work and clinical skills from actual placement, and that was a big thing for them. Also with the skills changes to more generic skills, they feel really concerned that they're not able to meet this. So where they're picking as placements and where they're picking as their final career, this is really key to them, that they're going to feel they get their learning needs met, because they do feel like there's a huge gap in their knowledge, that they feel they may be at a disadvantage because of the pandemic. Because all my participants started their training in the pandemic, they've had a really rough time. And then the final one was they found a lot of barriers to values-based practice. So they talked a lot about their values. When I gave them the values scale, they marked everything was strongly agree, strongly agree, strongly agree. But actually they then spoke about some of the conflict and being able to bring that into practice. And it'd be interesting, I think, to follow that as people go along. So for me, obviously, I'm continuing the recruitment over the next few months. I need a few more participants. I'm really hopeful to get them. And then we'll be followed throughout the whole year, and the study will continue until all the interviews are completed, unless people have withdrawn from the study. And then we'll continue to look at the interviews and the scales. And then I'm not going to use the scales with the participants to the final interview. And then I'm going to pick the top 3 disparities and kind of understand from them what they are. I'm really hoping to be able to produce something out of this that looks at how we get that period better and how we support our mental health nurses better through this period. But like I say, there's still a lot of way to go, a lot of learning for me as well about this process. But that is where I am at the moment with it. Thank you.
I think this is a fascinating study. I haven't talked to you about this for a long time. But I'm going to open up the floor to questions. Adam?
Yeah, I've got 2 questions. One, when you've done your searches and you drew the 13 papers, I'm just wondering where the research was undertaken. Was it all UK based, or was it?
So they weren't all UK based, no. The majority were, because the problem was there were other mental health nursing ones, but because the training's so different in America and other areas, it didn't really apply. So on the initial search, loads came out, but my final papers, 2 weren't from the UK.
Cool. And then my second question, sorry, that's cheeky.
No, go on.
The second question is the demographics of your participants. So what I'm thinking is male, female, and around Preston, particularly at UConn, we have a large African population of students. So I'm wondering, what are the demographics?
So obviously I've only got 9, but I can tell you them. 5 are white, I think British. I've not collected it out, so I don't want to make assumptions, but 5 white, 4 Afro-Caribbean, African communities, and 1 is an international student.
I wanted just to add.
Oh, sorry. But I did manage it. I can't help it. So we go to Carmel and then back to you, Peggy, and then Michael. Is that all right?
Yeah, thank you, Zoe. It was really, really interesting. And I think you might find when I do my presentation, there's a little bit of crossover.
For me.
But I was just interested, on the first slide you talked about leavers, so people leaving, and the higher education HEE report 2020. You might not know the answer to this, and it's just me questioning as you were speaking. Where does that data come from? Is it people that are registered, that are still registered, or have actually left the register? Does anyone else know?
I don't know. I need to look. I feel like I was going to answer naturally, saying I think it comes from the NMC, but I don't know. That is the answer. Yeah. Because I know in the national one it was said 6,000 nurses left within the first 3 years of qualifying, so I assume that's people who've left, but it is an assumption. I don't. Yeah. That's how it was worded, but I don't know how they've got it. Yeah.
You know, people go abroad. I did. Still not having registered and out.
The universities collect post-destination data and then follow it up. So maybe that's part of the data capture.
Yeah.
Because the NFC potentially would have a 3-year lag, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Because if you kind of went, this is not for me, it left, then it wouldn't be till the point of your re-registration necessarily. Or maybe no, annually, wouldn't it? Because they'd be asking for your annual
money.
fee.
Yeah.
That would be the tax place, wouldn't it?
You
That's probably where.
You can do a Freedom of Information Act to get destination of leavers data.
Oh, well, thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
so,
Thank
I think Peggy was next.
Hi, Peggy.
I think it was more a comment just to add on Adam's, because I had a question. It was more around demographics as well.
Yeah.
So I think when I was reading your findings so far, it's already very interesting in terms of what will be coming up. And I was thinking about the age range. You know, probably it's coming from as well your findings. So mature students versus so I was thinking about ethnicity.
Yeah.
Because when we talk about values and differences, So this is something as well. I'm glad to see that part of your participants, we had that kind of diversity as well, which I think is very important.
Yeah, it's been really interesting as well, and not in a good way, to be honest, because I've done a few kind of conversations with groups, and I think there is a disparity when you're looking at people's ethnicity and the experience they've had in wards, and people are saying they feel they've been treated differently and their experiences have been different, which is obviously if it's here, but it's something that is coming out as well. So in all honesty, I hadn't really thought that much about that when I went into my recruitment. It kind of happened on its own, the diversity, but it's been really important, and it's something kind of I really need to now look at and make sure I continue with the rest of recruitment, because there are different themes coming up as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael?
So my question, well, first of all, I want to say it sounds like a great story.
Thank
so
you.
You know that a few of us are writing around mental health identity here at NorQual and other areas, and part of us are part of some of us are part of the Mental Health Deserves Better movement, which is looking at mental health nurse curriculum and how does that prepare nurses, mental health nurses in particular, to work in mental health nurse roles. And some of the things that you were saying there quite resonated with me. So one of them was around transition shock, the other one was around values and things like that. I'm quite interested in, first of all, if we're seeing an increase in attrition from nursing, mental health nursing, people who are relatively newly qualified, how much of that is mental health nurse curricula not supporting or preparing nurses effectively to work within the mental health nursing role?
So at the moment there has been a difference in responses between, because some of the people, because obviously there's different HEIs I've spoken to, and there's some people, so for example York University all follow the generic curriculum the whole way through pretty much, and there's other unis that do really specific, obviously mental health nursing curriculum at the moment still. The answers about people's experience and how prepared people feel have been really different. And that's even not taking my study apart when I've been recruiting from universities, just hearing people's experiences. The people who have followed a very generic course have had a very different experience and felt less prepared than people who have been supported more solely in a mental health nursing focused way.
So this excites me because this is actually real research that sort of supports what we've been saying all along. The other thing that I just wanted to ask is, those people who are qualified, obviously Health Education England have come out and said, oh, they really value mental health nursing, but their focus tends to be more on post-reg stuff rather than pre-reg. How do we bridge that gap? Any thoughts?
No. Well, no, but what I think it's a really important question, don't know the answer, but what I have observed is that pre-reg nursing, mental health nursing students, there's something, and I don't know if this really answers your question or I've gone a bit tangential because I haven't got a clue, but what a lot of pre-reg nursing students are talking about is the lack of kind of bridge, if we're talking about bridges between, and this is even during their final placements moving into their career, between their educational setting and their placement provider, and that has been a really, really difficult experience, and it's kind of that they've spoken about that experience, but regarding kind of any other spot, I don't.
Yeah, I was going to ask a similar thing about MH Deserves Better, but after that question I kind of thought, because I went to the last NMC council meeting and raised the letter that had been sent to them because they've not replied to it yet. And I'm going to the next council meeting on Wednesday where I'll ask again where the reply is. But I'm thinking that I'll also highlight the research that you're doing and say that the NMC need to take an interest in it. Because I think there is that real kind of connection to what is actually happening in the workplace and what they think is happening, and sort of the anxieties about whether the NMC are taking this issue seriously or not. And I think what's helpful is that research going on in it, means that there's that extra kind of educational weight behind it, so that's really helpful.
And what's come up a lot as well, if this does help as well, is and this has come up with nearly everybody, even the people who do specific placement kind of mental health specific training, is these changing competencies. It's had a huge detrimental impact on people and their kind of confidence in going into the workplace. So happy to share kind of any of that. Like I say, it's a work in progress, but as it's coming along. So.
Are you hearing that students are more concerned about efficiencies in getting laws signed off than anything else? Is that what you're hearing from?
Yeah, and again, that depends really trust specific where people are, because what they're finding is in some places they're going on placements and nobody in their placement knows how to cannulate, how to do this, how to do that. So they're like, well, it's
signed off for something where you just have to work.
Yeah. Well, none of us, and we all know, don't we? I don't know how to cannulate. That people are coming in placement and asking for that to be signed off. So it's a huge issue. And people are like, when are we ever going to do it as well? When are we ever going to need to do that? And a lot of people are saying that.
Don't you think we've got two issues in there, really? One is I think that we've got to be aware of the students coming into practice being properly prepared. So what most of us are doing is creating a workaround. So whilst we know that we've got to sort of generate time for potential skills that are going to be washed out, we then have to find the time to work around, because I think we've got to hit a balance between the proper preparation of students to enable them to be nurses, and then, because that reflects back on us, doesn't it, in the sense of what we do, but also to recognise our workarounds, because I think we've been doing, a lot of the simulation in the last couple of years has been extraordinary, hasn't it? That I look at our simulation work now, and it's so much more sophisticated than it might have been in the past, and it actually reflects much tighter to what's happening in practice, because it's often a lot of clinicians who are delivering it, or current clinicians. So I think and also COVID, we've got to remember the last 2 years, it's been a really complex time for these students, hasn't it? They've turned up and they've been working within a vacuum, and we've been working in a vacuum, but they've also been on placement, and they all those accidental conversations we would normally have in a classroom are lost on Zoom, aren't they? All of the placement support that we would have done to create workarounds are lost because of Zoom. And I think that students are still entering practice with a good level of safety around their thinking. But I want to go back to your main point about values, that if their stone of life is strong, if we've created a good value-based program, then that will make them, it should enable them through transition, isn't it? Because my comment to students at the moment is, what kind of staff nurse do you want to be?
Yeah.
And that equals what kind of value base do you want to take into your work? So I get all the tension around, and I write about the letter, and I rightly think that people are standing up and going, oi, you need to pay attention to this, and you also need to pay attention, I think, to what our fix is. Because I think we've been fixing it, which is what nurses do all the time, frustratingly and rightly. We're constantly fixing stuff, aren't we? So we need proper recognition for the workarounds that we've done to enable our practitioners actually to be. Do you know what I mean? The point, but so my sense is that stone of life, those values are absolutely fundamentally important to what we do for a living, aren't they?
And actually, we
bed them in, don't we?
Yeah.
We might have got them right, but what we're doing is we're being distracted by teaching skills that get washed out.
But what's coming out though is these students are having this, they've got a great set of values, really beautiful set of values, but then what happens? Because that's not what people are then telling us a bit later down the line.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I beg your pardon, sorry.
No, mine wasn't a question actually, it was just to thank you for your presentation, and I'm not a nurse. But I'm an approved mental health professional with a social work background, and I was thinking about research and just how useful your study sounds, and I think it could maybe be translated into other settings like following up students, which might include some nurses from their training and supported placements to then actually what happens, because there's really similar issues in our practice where recruitment and retention are really difficult. So yeah, I just wanted to comment that I thought it was a really inspiring thing.